There's a little mysterious music for you. Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. It's going to be Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, both hours today, as you can tell by the music. That is our Weird Questions music. Jimmy is the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where he tackles all kinds of mysteries, mysteries of the faith, mysteries about aliens, everything tackled over there on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And now we get lots and lots of weird questions for Jimmy Akin. So we do these weird question shows, and we are delighted when they come around for two reasons. One, we get to hang out with Jimmy for 2 hours talking about weird things, and we get to hear that music. Jimmy Akin, thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure, Si. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. Are you feeling confident that these questions are weird enough? Do you feel like we've got...
Oh, I'm pretty non-judgmental, but they are at least weirder than average.
Okay. All right. And today, August 9th, lovely weather out. What dropped this morning?
Yeah, he asked knowing that we're doing a pre-record.
We're pre-recording the show. I don't know what the weather is today.
Yeah, well, what dropped today on Mysterious World is an episode. I've been doing a Lost Scriptures series. So these are books that at least some people have considered scripture, but they're not in the Bible. And so most people don't know about them, so hence Lost. And I've been doing a two-part look at the book of First Enoch, which is actually quoted in the New Testament. The book of Jude quotes from First Enoch. And so this last week, I looked at the general background of the book, and this week I'm looking at the first part of the book, which is itself known as the Book of the Watchers. And it contains a lot of material about early Genesis, and specifically about the mysterious passage in Genesis 6 that talks about the sons of God marrying the daughters of men and giving birth to the Nephilim. And so this particular book was written a few centuries before Jesus Christ. The Book of Enoch itself is a composite of several different earlier works, and the Book of Enoch is one of the earliest ones, and it has a lot of interest in Second Temple Jewish traditions about what was going on in that very mysterious passage in Genesis.
Ah, very cool. You can check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World every Friday. A new episode drops. There's more than 300. I'm approaching 400. I guess that's what happens when you pass 300. Now you're approaching 400, but you can find it.
Well, you're always approaching 400 until you hit 400.
Yeah, exactly. Then you are, I don't know. Then you're approaching 500. Go to mysterious.fm if you want to listen, or check out Jimmy's Jimmy has lots of stuff on YouTube. Lots more and more stuff available on YouTube. So check out all of Jimmy's work there. All right, weird questions come to us via all kinds of social media and other sources. So I get to read them, and Jimmy gets to answer them. And we'll start with a question from Tony. Hey, Jimmy, what is your opinion about the Shrine of the Three Kings, a reliquary traditionally believed to contain the bones of the biblical magi? Is it possible that the first Christians knew exactly who were those three men and somehow obtained their remains?
Okay, so first off, they weren't kings. That's kind of a modern idea, but the Bible says they were magi, which means basically that they practiced various forms of trying to foretell the future, including astrology. So they weren't kings. The shrine that Tony's referring to is in Cologne, Germany. And I haven't seen it myself, although my brother did go see it. The relics that are in the shrine allegedly were brought back by Constantine's mother in the 300s, brought back to Europe. But these are very unlikely to be authentic. In the first place, we don't even know that there were three kings. All the Bible says is that magi came from the east, and magi is plural, so we know there were at least two, but there may have been two, there may have been three, there may have been 10, there may have been 20. We really don't know. The reason the number 3 gets attached is that they offered 3 kinds of gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But that doesn't mean that there were 3 magi. We're also told in Matthew that they went back to their own country, and we're not told what their country was. There are several possibilities. We know it was to the east of Judea, and there are a number of options for what their ethnic group may have been and where they went back to, but we're told that they went back. And so it is very unlikely that given that uh, Matthew does not record their names or where they're from, that anybody back then would have had the names and gone to their original country and dug up their bones and brought them back to Europe. That's very unlikely. So I think that it's better to think of the reliquary in Cologne more as a cenotaph than as an actual grave. A cenotaph is where you build a monument to someone that you don't know where their body is buried, or you at least don't have their body here, but you nevertheless want to commemorate them. And so that's how I'd think of the shrine in Cologne, as a cenotaph.
All right. Thank you, Tony, for getting us started on Weird Questions. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today on Catholic Answers Live. Chase wants to know this. Oh, same question from everybody. Does quantum superposition undercut the principle of non-contradiction? Oh, that question again.
No, it doesn't. So first, I should mention what the law of non-contradiction is. It's a principle of logic that says nothing can be both true and false in the same way at the same time in the same manner. So it's if I say, the apple is on the table, that's either true or false, and it can't be both at the same time. I mean, obviously, the apple could be on the table at one time, but not at another time. So the law of non-contradiction excludes that, because it says at the same time, in the same place, in the same manner. So it's pretty narrowly defined. Now, superposition is what we see in a mathematical description of the likely outcome of a situation involving quantum mechanics if we were to take a measurement. And the classic example of this is Schrodinger's cat. The physicist Erwin Schrödinger said, okay, one way to illustrate a superposition is you take a cat, you put it in a box, and inside the box there is a capsule of poison gas. And the capsule of poison gas is attached to a device that will shatter the capsule and release the poison if a quantum event happens, like a radioactive element happens to decay at a particular moment and release some subatomic particles. Well, that's the quantum event. The subatomic particles being released. Are they released? Are they not released? Until you take a measurement, meaning until you open the box and look to see if the cat is alive or dead, you could think about the cat as being both alive and dead, because it could be one, it could be the other. And that's the outcome of quantum mechanical equations. They incorporate both possibilities for what could happen. Actually, they include a range of possibilities. But that doesn't establish that the cat is really both alive and dead in the same way at the same time. There are multiple different interpretations of quantum mechanics. One interpretation is known as the Copenhagen interpretation, and it is sometimes described as shut up and calculate. In other words, just do the calculations, don't worry about what they physically mean. And if you take the Copenhagen interpretation, you could kind of gloss that as, well, the cat's both alive and dead, because that's what the equations would indicate until you take the measurement. But there are other interpretations. For example, one alternative interpretation of quantum mechanics is a classical realism form, where there are what are known as hidden variables. There are variables that exist, but we haven't measured them, we haven't detected them, and they really determine what's going on. So on a classical realism understanding of quantum mechanics, the cat is either alive or dead before you open the box, you just don't know which. There's also the many worlds interpretation that says every time an event happens, the universe sort of branches. And so if the radioactive element decays, it creates one branch. If it doesn't decay, it creates another branch. And in one branch, the cat is alive, and in the other branch, the cat is dead. And in the same way, in a many worlds interpretation, the cat is not both alive and dead at the same place at the same time in the same way. He's alive in one branch, but he's dead in the other branch. So one way or another, once you take the measurement, the cat is either alive or dead and not both. And so this doesn't violate the law of non-contradiction just because we don't know what's happening before we take the measurement.
Well, thank you very much, Chase. I think I understand Schrodinger's cat a little bit more. I've heard of it, but now I feel like I got a better grip on it. Thank you very much for the question, Chase. That brings us to the break. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Both hours, weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Another great podcast on EWTN Podcast Central is The Beatitudes. It's a religiously funny podcast that explores what it takes to be a Christian man in the modern world. You can hear this and other faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place, all free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click on Podcast Central today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. A little bit of Weird Questions music there. This is Weird Questions for Jimmy Akin. Hey, the Catholic Answers Conference is coming up. If you want to come, just go to CatholicAnswersConference.com. It's September 26th through 29th right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. Jimmy Akin will be one of our featured speakers. Dr. Scott Hahn, Kimberly Hahn, Father Sebastian Walsh, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Dr. William Junker, and all of our apologists will do the radio show. We'd love it if you would come and hang out with us for a few days. CatholicAnswersConference.com. Up next, a question from Terry. Why doesn't the Bible talk about Mary Magdalene after the Gospels? What actually happened to her? Was she still part of the church?
Well, in terms of answering this question, kind of a preliminary question is, where would we read about her after the Gospels? I mean, you've taken the Gospels off the table. So what else is there in the New Testament? Well, there's the book of Acts, and there's a bunch of letters, like the letters to St. Paul and the Catholic letters, and even the book of Revelation is actually a letter. So it would be unusual for her to turn up in a letter, just like tons of other characters from the Gospels are not mentioned in the letters because they're written to address particular situations. And unless Mary Magdalene was involved in one of those situations, you wouldn't expect her to be mentioned. You know, she's just living her life in presumably Judea or Galilee, and the letters are not really written to Judea and Galilee. So you wouldn't expect her to be mentioned. That leaves us with the book of Acts. But the book of Acts has two central protagonists, St. Peter, who dominates the first 12 chapters, and St. Paul, who dominates chapters 13 to 28. So that's what Luke is focusing on in Acts. He's not focusing on other people for the most part. There are a few people who get a little bit of focus besides Peter and Paul, like Philip the evangelist, he's in chapter 8, or Stephen, the first martyr, he's in, chapter 7. But really, this is the Peter and Paul show. And so Mary doesn't get mentioned in the book of Acts, but she is mentioned in the Gospels, and she's mentioned multiple times and by name. Now, one of the things that scholars have noted is that when you read the Gospels, there are a bunch of secondary figures, not apostles, who come in and out of the story at various points, and a bunch of them are anonymous. Like Jesus heals a blind man, but we don't know the name of that blind man. Or Jesus exorcises someone, and we don't know the name of the person he exorcised. But in other cases, they do get names, Lazarus, Mary and Martha, Mary Magdalene, Jairus, and Zacchaeus and other people. And one of the, I think the best explanation of why some of these secondary figures are anonymous and some of the secondary figures get names is because the ones with names continued to be part of the Christian community. They continued to be active in the Christian community in the church age. And so after the death and resurrection of Christ, people who were still around and still active and whose names were known to the Christian community got mentioned by name because you know who they were. In fact, there's even a suggestion, and I think this is a good suggestion too, made by the British scholar Richard Bauckham, that the ones with names also, the evangelists are signaling who this tradition about this person came from. So like Mary Magdalene would be, by saying Mary Magdalene, this happened to Mary Magdalene and that happened to Mary Magdalene, like at the end of John's gospel, that's John signaling this is where this tradition comes from. Mary Magdalene is the tradent, the person who bore the tradition for the later church. And so I think that even though she's not mentioned after the gospels, because you really wouldn't expect her to be, given what is in the rest of the New Testament, I think we do have evidence from the Gospels themselves that indicate, yeah, she continued to be an active member of the Christian community. People still knew her name, and that's why she gets named. And she also was the bearer of the traditions that concerned her.
Thanks, Terry. Excellent question. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin today. Adam wants to know this. Hey, Jimmy, in the world of online video games, sometimes people like to play together, but since players like to play mean and rude, there was once a funeral held for a player within World of Warcraft that was interrupted by other players that decided to attack the players attending the in-game funeral. Are we morally culpable for actions taken in virtual worlds?
Okay, so I don't know a huge amount about the world of online games. I do know some, primarily from watching The Guild with Felicia Day. If you've never checked out that web series, it's about a group of gamers who are all very eccentric and play together in an online game based on World of Warcraft. And Felicia Day is playing a gamer. She's the writer of the series, and she plays a character named Codex who is addicted to the game. And she's so addicted to the game that in the opening episode she talks about how her psychiatrist broke up with her because she wasn't making progress with her game addiction. So it's an interesting comedy show. But so my experience is limited, but here's what I would have to say. We are responsible for what we do in virtual worlds, but not in straightforward terms, because the virtual worlds are not the real world. They're a set of environments in which people come together and agree to share certain types of experiences. And so the issue is, what have people agreed to do? If you know that if you're attending a funeral, another group may bust in and try to attack you as a way of playing the game, and you agree to that, then they're not doing something wrong. On the other hand, if this is Happy Pretty Kitty Pony Land and you're not expecting another group to bust in on the funeral of Happy Kitty Pretty Pony, then they're violating the social contract that everybody agreed to, and that would be wrong. So I would say it depends on the situation. It's going to depend on the game and the gamers and what they've all agreed to.
Oh, what a great question, Adam. So this is just a TV series made for the web?
The Guild?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very, so.
You can watch it online.
Oh, all right, cool. James wants to know this. Hello, Jimmy. This is a threefold question regarding angels.
Oh, boy.
When were the angels created by God? What motivated Lucifer and the other angels to rebel against God? Were they all cast down upon the earth, or do they exist in another spiritual dimension, separated from God, and pass back and forth between that spiritual dimension and the earth?
Okay, so we are not told what We are not told when the angels were created, so it's a matter of speculation. However, most authors have concluded that they were made by God before mankind was made. Now, in terms of scientific cosmology, we don't know when that would have been. You could guess anything. They could have been created before the Big Bang. They could have been created because the Big Bang just deals with the origin of the physical world, not the spiritual world that angels come from. They could have been created, you know, a million years before mankind. They could have been created at all kinds of points, but most people have concluded that they were created before man. One reason for that is that in the book of Job, there is a passage where God recalls creation, and he's kind of grilling Job. It is like, were you here when creation happened and the foundation stone of the earth was laid and the sons of God shouted for joy, and the stars shouted for joy, with stars being an image of angels? And so that would suggest that they were present at the creation of the physical world. There's a book from about 150 years before the time of Christ called Jubilees, and it's basically a rewritten version of Genesis and part of Exodus. I did a Mysterious World about it a few weeks ago, and it's a really fascinating book. According to the Jubilist, which is what you can call the author of Jubilees, the angels were created on the first day of creation from Genesis 1. And not only were they created then, according to the Jubilist, but all spirits of God's creatures were created then. So the Jubilist thinks that even like human spirits were created, that they didn't come into existence at conception, but on the first day of creation, which is an interesting idea that has not generally been favored in Christian history. Also, the Jubilist gives us a bunch of details about the different kinds of angels, and some of it's really fascinating. He says that that there are basically 7 classes of angels, and the 2 highest, the angels of the presence and the angels of holiness, get to be with God in heaven, but the others are like down on earth, run in nature. So there's like angels of fire and angels of wind and stuff like that that govern the natural elements of the world. And interestingly, only the 2 kinds of angels in heaven take the Sabbath off. They rest with God on the Sabbath. But the angels run in nature, they got to keep working.
I guess so.
And keep nature running. And also the 2 classes of angels that are with God in heaven all the time, they're created circumcised, whereas the angels run in nature are not created circumcised. And so you've got this kind of Jewish class of angels up in heaven and the Gentile class of angels run down on earth.
Yeah, right.
In terms of now, none of that's biblical, so don't trust all that stuff. But I just think it's fascinating that they would go there. It's like, wow, circumcised angels. Okay. Now, in terms of why they fell, it's common for Christians to think about the angels having just one fall, like they all fell at the same moment. But that's actually not the model that seems to be in the minds of the biblical authors. They seem to envision different falls of angels. In terms of the primordial fall, because you've got Satan, he's the serpent, and so that fall had to occur very early. We don't know. We're never told, and there's been a lot of speculation about that. Some people have said, oh, the devil, it was pride, and other people have said, oh, he knew that Jesus was going to incarnate as a man, and he couldn't bear the thought of bowing down to an earthly being like a man, and so that's why he rebelled. I'm very, very skeptical of all of these attempts to get inside the devil's head and figure out why he fell. Fundamentally, it's irrational. Sin makes you stupid. And so I'm more comfortable saying we just don't know. In terms of later falls, like the sons of God who married the daughters of men, well, that's what they're portrayed as. That's the motivation for their fall. They want to get hitched and have babies when that's not what angels are supposed to do. Now, whether you believe that's the correct interpretation of the passage or not, there were a lot of Jewish people in the Second Temple era who thought that. And so that's one of the options that at least is in the Jewish mind. In terms of were they all cast down on the earth, or do they exist in a spiritual dimension and kind of pass back and forth? Scripture presents them, at least the ones that are free, as moving back and forth between the spiritual world and earth. But there are different ways of conceptualizing this. Now, some of the Second Temple literature and even the later books of the New Testament, like 2 Peter and Jude, talk about certain spirits have been put in prison, but others are still roaming free, and some of them, according to some conceptualizations, live in the atmosphere, but in an invisible way that we can't otherwise detect.
James, thanks. Got to take a very quick break. Right back with more Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. What was the church like in its infancy? In a word, Catholic. And Joe Heschmeyer has the receipts. In his best-selling book, The Early Church Was the Catholic Church, he gives you the details from the historical records of the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Right now, get a copy for just $10, plus free shipping if you live in the continental United States. Get more information and order The Early Church Was the Catholic Church at theearlychurchwascatholic.com.
Is orthodoxy an alternative to the Catholic Church? In a time of uncertainty for many Catholics, orthodoxy can look like greener pastures. Answering Orthodoxy, the new book from Catholic Answers Press, explains why Catholics who are thinking of leaving need to think twice. There are important reasons to remain in the Catholic Church and convincing answers to Orthodox claims. Order your copy of Answering Orthodoxy today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Is the Catholic faith still a rock amidst the waves of history? Why does it so often seem to be a mess? In his latest book, Confusion in the Kingdom, best-selling author Trent Horn helps you to get to the roots of the present chaos, explaining the destabilizing movements within Catholicism and exposing the harm and scandal progressive Catholicism has caused. Order your copy of Confusion in the Kingdom today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers Monthly Giving Club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. That music means it's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today, and we're working our way through them. We're having a lot of fun with them. If you got weird questions, you can get them to us. We'll get them to Jimmy, and Jimmy collects them up as well. If you're part of his social media kind of following, then you can be alerted when it's time for some weird questions. We love these episodes where we get to just talk about weird things with people. This one comes from Fidei. In the Old Testament, it seems evident that those in Israel and maybe in the surrounding cultures cared more about what happened in this life than in the next. This is even to the point, generally speaking, that they didn't care what bad things happened in the world they left behind after they died, as long as they weren't around to see it happen. An example of this is Hezekiah's odd reaction to Isaiah's dooming prophecy at the end of Isaiah 39. I'm also thinking about the episode when Nebuchadnezzar gouges out the eyes of Zedekiah after he kills his sons right before him, ensuring that Zedekiah does not die before he sees his progeny destroyed. It also states in the Old Testament, in the Psalms, I believe, that in death there is no remembrance. Was that indicative of what they believed about the afterlife in Sheol?
Well, there certainly was more of a focus on this life than on the afterlife in the Old Testament. The focus on the afterlife really becomes prominent with Christianity in the New Testament. But there's been a lot of poorly informed talk about Sheol, the place of the dead in Jewish thought. You sometimes hear folks saying that Jews before the time of Christ or before a certain point in their history didn't believe in the afterlife. And that is absolutely false. there was one group at the time of Christ that didn't. That was the Sadducees, but they were not representative of Jews as a whole. In fact, we have really good archaeological evidence that Jews did believe in an afterlife for centuries and centuries before the time of Christ. And it wasn't as bleak as it's often portrayed. Sometimes you'll hear people say Sheol, or the place of the dead, was this like bleak, shadowy existence, but they're really speculating there. The archaeological evidence we have indicates that Jewish people continued to honor and care for their ancestors. We find that they brought gifts like food and wine and left them at the graves of their ancestors to provide for them in the afterlife. We also find that they buried their ancestors with grave goods like knives and stuff so they could do stuff in the afterlife. So so they actually had a fairly robust vision of what the afterlife was like, at least of what we would call the intermediate state between death and resurrection. Now, in terms of not living to see tragedy, well, being safely in the afterlife by the time something bad happens ain't a bad thing. I mean, think about global thermonuclear war. I hope there is never a global thermonuclear war, but if there is going to be one, I would rather be safely dead and in heaven rather than have to live through it. So, you know, and similarly, you know, seeing your kids killed in front of your eyes, like Zedekiah, you know, that would be horrific for anybody, even if it's someone who has their primary focus on this life. I mean, that's just deliberate cruelty. Kill your progeny, kill your children, and then blind you so that's the last thing you see. You know, that's horrific, regardless of what you think about an afterlife. The passage that says, in death there is no remembrance of you, in Sheol who can give you praise, that's from Psalm 6, verse 5. And there are a couple of ways of understanding that. One is that, like in the book of Ecclesiastes, the psalmist is here speaking from a perspective under the sun, meaning what can be confidently known in this life. And from a perspective that's confined to this life, you know, it doesn't look like dead people remember God. They're just kind of laying there dead and they're not praising him. And so, you know, we're not addressing what really goes on in the afterlife. We're just speaking, because the Psalms are poetry, we're speaking in a poetic terms based on what it looks like dead people do. Also, there's another way of looking at it, which is, well, if you die, what are you going to be thanking God for? You know, if I'm here, I'm alive, like I'm the psalmist, and I'm praying that God deliver me, which is what the psalmist is doing here. Well, then if God delivers me, I'm going to thank him and praise him. But the people who've already died, they're not going to remember that God saved them because he didn't, and they're not going to praise him for saving them because he didn't. So there are different ways of looking at this. But we do have strong evidence that even though it wasn't as emphasized as it came to be in the New Testament, the afterlife was something that ancient Israelites believed in and had practices about.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Fidei. Next one comes from Wensen4167. Has your paranormal research led you to change your views or answers on phenomena such as Qi and practices such as Qigong regarding their compatibility with Catholicism?
Okay, so Qi is the Chinese name for a form of biological energy that is not known to science. It has not been discovered. The Japanese name is Qi, and there are practices like Qigong and Reiki that claim to manipulate this energy for various beneficial purposes. Qigong, for example, attempts to manipulate, or Qigong, now you got me doing it.
Sorry.
No problem.
Just say King Kong.
Yeah, Qigong is an attempt to manipulate Qi for various purposes, including health and martial arts. Qigong involves slow meditative movements, And because qi is not known to conventional science, we don't have a basis for its claims in terms of conventional science. However, some of its reported therapeutic effects, if you're doing slow meditative movements and you're intending that these help you out with your health, well, there might be some therapeutic benefit to doing that just due to the placebo effect, where if you think a procedure is going to work, it tends to work. And the placebo effect is known to conventional science. In terms of parapsychology, it has studied unconventional healing methods, and it has found, including things like Qigong and Reiki, and it has found some effectiveness to them. However, all that shows is that this technique can be effective in some circumstances, perhaps due to placebo, perhaps due to something else. What it doesn't do is validate the claimed mechanism that is behind this, namely the manipulation of this unknown energy, because the energy is still unknown. Parapsychology hadn't found it. Neither has any other branch of science. And so the energy explanation is a speculative one that could explain the effectiveness of some forms of treatment, but it also could be explained in other ways too. In terms of compatibility with the Catholic faith, the doctrinal committee of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops actually had a paper on Reiki a few years ago that was quite interesting. I thought it was very well balanced. It basically divided the issue in two, and it says, look, there's the scientific question of does this work, and there's the religious aspects of it. And if you take out the religious aspects and treat Reiki as just a scientific discipline or just a practice that's evaluated in scientific terms, then there's not going to be a conflict with the Christian faith because you've removed the religious elements, just like in chiropractic. There originally were some religious elements there that kind of got put to one side. There have been other practices that have had religious elements that are now part of standard medicine that without the religious part. And so if you're mixing in non-Christian religious elements, that's a problem. But if you take those out, that's not a problem. And then you're left to evaluate it in terms of, is it effective in terms of science? Now, the paper that the doctrinal committee put out was, according to my memory, it was based on conventional science, and conventional science says this is undiscovered, we have no basis here. It didn't really look at parapsychological studies of healing techniques. So, I might want to modify it in terms of that, but I think it had a fundamentally sound approach.
Win Sen, thank you very much for the question. You brought us right to the break. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
From Rome to your home, EWTN's Vatican Bureau lets you watch all of the important events from Rome, even if you don't have a TV. Using the latest technology, we've made it possible to watch the latest news from the Holy See, all delivered directly to your home. Watch live on EWTN YouTube and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. EWTN is the global Catholic network.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. And we're doing weird questions. One of those fun things we get to do with Jimmy on Fridays sometimes. And lots of questions in, lots of them weird. Here's one I'm looking forward to the answer to. Bingus2464 asks this. Is there any evidence to support the claim that Emperor Guangwu of China saw a prophecy of Jesus' death before it happened?
Okay, so Emperor Guangwu of Han was the emperor of China in the year Jesus was crucified, and for several years before and after. The claim that he had some kind of prophetic knowledge of Jesus and his death was popularized very recently in English in 2006. It was popularized by an author named Chan K. Thong in his book Faith of Our Fathers. Thong is Christian, so good for him. Go Team Christian. And he was seeking to prove that ancient Chinese people worshipped the God of the Bible, which is something you're going to have an uphill climb for. However, and he did find some quotations from Emperor Guangwu that if you take them in isolation, and translate them a certain way, it can make it sound like Jesus. Like one of them talks about the sins of the people being put on one man. But it appears that Thong took these quotations out of context and in some cases partially mistranslated them into English. As soon as I started looking at the claims, at the quotations, I thought, this, given the position of the emperor in Chinese culture, this could easily be the emperor talking about himself here. And based on the reading I've done, it appears that Emperor Guangwu was actually, in some of these cases, he's speaking of himself, not about Jesus. And thus far, I have not found a good evidential basis for this claim. But if you're interested in hearing the case for this claim, you could check out Chan K. Thong's book, Faith of Our Fathers, but I'd also suggest going online and doing some counter checking for the case against, because it does look like Thong has misrepresented some of these out of context and has mistranslated some of them.
All right, Bingus2464, thank you very much for that interesting question. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin. This one comes from Mark Shea. Is that the regular Mark Shea?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why I said the regular Mark Shea. Like there's irregular Mark Shea. Is that just the well-known Mark Shea is what I meant. If an electric-powered boat is sinking and a shark is 10 feet away, should you choose electrocution or risk the shark? Also, why is nobody talking about all the shark attacks? And is it true that sharks bite women's legs off because they are misunderstood?
Okay, so if the choice is between definitely being electrocuted and possibly being shark attacked, I would choose to risk the shark attack. So I would jump off the certain death electrocution. We're assuming the electrocution would be severe enough it would kill me. If it's just a little shock, who cares? Then I'd stick with the electrocution. But if it's serious enough it could kill me, I'll jump in the water and brave the shark. Unprovoked shark attacks are actually very, very rare on humans. Now, if you're a tuna, all bets are off. But if you're a human, unprovoked shark attacks are actually very rare. There are only 63 of them on average occurring around the globe each year. And given the millions of people who go down to the beach and swim in the water and go out on boats and stuff, 63 out of a population of 8 billion people is really, really darn small. And they're also highly survivable because the number of fatalities due to unprovoked shark attack every year is between 5 and 10. So that's you've got your odds of surviving. Even if an unprovoked shark attack occurs, your odds of surviving it are 10 in 12 or 11 in 12 or something like that. Yeah. So I'd risk the shark. In terms of people talking about them and so forth, it is not true that sharks bite off women's legs because they are misunderstood. Whether you interpret that in terms of the sharks being misunderstood or in terms of the women being misunderstood.
I don't even know what that means, but I definitely would jump in with that shark. Thank you for the question. Marcello asks this. What's with all this Nephilim talk lately in the media and culture?
Okay, so Genesis 6, which is the main passage where the Nephilim appear, although there is actually another one later in the Pentateuch. It's one of the most mysterious passages in Scripture, and that means that people are curious about it, and it also means that it's easy to misinterpret and exploit. And one individual who's done a lot of misinterpretation and exploitation of Genesis 6 and the Nephilim was an author named Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia Sitchin was an individual who claimed to speak various ancient Near Eastern languages like Babylonian and Sumerian and stuff like that. He did not. He was lying. But that didn't stop him from writing a big series of books, starting with one called The 12th Planet, in which he proposed that there is another planet in our solar system called Nibiru that has a highly elliptical orbit. And like every 12,000 years, it plunges into the inner solar system and then it zooms back out into the outer solar system. And according to him, Nibiru was inhabited by a race of sort of human aliens who messed with our ancestors in order to make them human and have them mine gold for the Nibiruans. And he got the Nephilim wrapped up in all of this stuff, and he claimed to be translating ancient Mesopotamian texts. It was all a lie, but it got out there, and he got interviewed on all kinds of shows like Coast to Coast AM. He was portrayed as if he was a real scholar when he wasn't, and he made a lot of money. Well, of course, that didn't go without a reaction from the scholarly community, and an evangelical scholar named Michael Heiser pointed out the problems with what Sitchin was claiming. And to set the record straight, Heiser did a bunch of work, and I actually knew Mike Heiser. He passed on last year, or earlier this year, unfortunately, at a young age. But I happen to know him, and he popularized a lot of Second Temple literature, like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, that talk about the Nephilim, and to try to get out, here's the real story on what they are, understood in biblical terms rather than this ancient aliens theory. But either way you go, aliens and angel human hybrids are both interesting to talk about. And so that's why, because of these recent events, the media has been talking about them a lot.
All right. Marcello, thank you very much for the question. One interesting thing is there are like planets that have weird elliptical orbits. Like they're discovering these now.
Well, yeah, although we don't have any in our solar system that we know of. What we do have that has weird elliptical orbits in our solar system is comets.
Oh yeah, they just come from so far out there in the like way past Pluto, way the heck out there. Come diving in, shoot off some gases, back out they go. All right, Jesus. I'm going to guess that Jesus is how he pronounces it. Ask this. By time traveling to the past, what are ramifications if, okay, this has numbers. 1, a person prevents the crucifixion.
Okay, so if someone went back in time and prevented the crucifixion from happening, we don't know what the result would be. It could be that Jesus would redeem us in some other way besides being crucified. It could also be the crucifixion would just be delayed. It could also be that we might remain unredeemed. So we don't know the answer to that question because God hadn't told us. But if you want to see a really interesting movie as an imaginative, exploration of this from a Christian viewpoint, I'm going to recommend the weirdest Christian movie that has ever been made.
Whoa!
It is called Black Easter. And Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity and I reviewed it, so you can check out that review on Cameron's channel. It is the weirdest Christian movie imaginable. It starts in the 20th century with a guy who's doing some research, and he and his buddies are super geniuses, but they're working for this Muslim gentleman, and they accidentally invent time travel. And then the Muslim gentleman gets the idea of he wants to go back in time and kill Jesus before the crucifixion to show everybody that he's not really the Son of God. and he sends a team of assassins
What?
back in time to kill Jesus. And they do. And Jesus accepts this knowing what's going to happen. And then our buddies who invented time travel decide to set the timeline right. So they go back into history, and they have a ton of interesting encounters with Jesus and other people. Like at one point, one of the characters, his name is Simon. He appears to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane as Jesus is praying, and he's trying to warn him about what's going to happen. And he explains, I'm from the future. And Jesus says, if you're from the future, how do you know all this? And he says, well, I'm from the future and I watched your movie. I'm sorry it was on pirate. Please forgive me. and at the end of that scene, Jesus is determined to go through with his mission. And he says, if you saw my movie, you should know I'll be back. Oh. Which is, a line from the Terminator, another time travel movie. And after Jesus walks away, Simon says, I'll be back. That's not even your movie.
Oh my gosh.
But what Simon has become is the angel that comforts Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Oh. Later, Simon turns into Simon of Cyrene, who carries Jesus's cross. And so we get all of our 20th century characters playing parts of minor characters in the Gospels, including the guy who runs away naked and the two angels at Jesus's tomb and all kinds of stuff. So it is a bizarre movie, but it's an exercise in Christian imagination trying to think through what would happen if you prevented the crucifixion.
Is it recent, this movie?
Yeah, it's recent.
Oh, okay. All right. So this has a part 2. What are the ramifications of, and this is number 2, talking to Jesus and informing him about his divinity and certain mysteries of the Trinity? Or alternate version, if the multiverse exists, would there be a different Jesus in each timeline since there is only one God? Whoa.
Okay, so Jesus already knew about his divinity, and he already knew about all the mysteries of the Trinity. So there wouldn't be any fundamental ramifications to telling him about these. It would be, yeah, duh, I'm God, I'm from eternity, I know all this already. If, and this is a big if, the multiverse exists, then depending on how it works, there might be alternate versions of Jesus in other realities where the Son of God chose to incarnate. Now, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are outside of creation. So they exist, even if there are multiple universes, they exist in all eternity, and they're creating those multiple universes if they exist. And the Son of God might choose to incarnate as Jesus in some of those universes. On the other hand, there could also be universes where he did not choose to incarnate. So it's really up to him.
All right. We got to go way back. Jesus, thank you for that. That series of questions also that got us a recommendation to, this is going to be on the poster, the weirdest Christian movie ever made, Jimmy Akin, underneath it. There's lots more weird questions coming up. Things about the Antichrist. What else we got coming up? Prehistoric ghosts, all kinds of weird stuff. So hang on for the second hour. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is his podcast, and he told me already, and now I'm having trouble remembering today's
Book of the Watchers from the Book of Enoch.
Oh yeah, the Book of Enoch. People love them some Book of Enoch. Every time we talk about the Book of Enoch, that gets lots of hits on the old internets. But that'll do it for us this hour, but we're going to do another hour of weird questions with Jimmy Akin. Just hang on. That is coming up. Don't forget the big Catholic Answers Conference coming up September 26th through 29th. It's getting closer and closer. We'd love it if you'd come. Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. Dr. Scott Hahn, one of the speakers. Lots of other great speakers, including our guests today, Jimmy Akin. Just go to CatholicAnswersConference.com and find out all about it. CatholicAnswersConference.com. We get the weird questions from every corner of the internet, every corner of the world, and lots more of them to come right after this with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. back to Catholic Answers Live. Thanks for coming back. I didn't want to get to the next question at the end of the last hour. I wanted to have time for Jimmy to answer it, but maybe he could have answered it quickly. I don't know. But I like to leave a little time for questions about the Antichrist because everyone likes to hear about the Antichrist. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin this hour. As it was last hour, weird questions come from us from every corner of the internet, and we gather them all up. Or actually, Jimmy gathers most of them up, and we share them with Jimmy on the air, and we get some cool answers.
They mention the Antichrist in Black Easter.
Oh, they do?
Like they do in a weird time travel-y way that I won't spoil.
I got to see this movie, Black Easter.
It is an experience.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it. All right.
It's also very amateurish, but it's an amateurish experience with creative thought put into it.
Sometimes amateurish is not so bad. Sometimes that adds to the fun of the movie. I think it adds to the fun of this program when I'm hosting. All right, let's go to Matthew's question. Matthew Schmidt, 5069. Will the Antichrist be from the tribe of Dan and Jewish, as some theologians think?
I think this is very unlikely. The basis for this proposal is that the tribe of Dan is not mentioned in one list of the 12 tribes that's found in the book of Revelation. But there is a big leap between Dan is not mentioned in this one list and the Antichrist must come from Dan.
Oh, yeah.
That's really stretching it. There is no good exegetical basis for that conclusion. It is pure speculation. Furthermore, the final Antichrist is likely to be a future echo of the beast from the sea in Revelation. And the beast from the sea corresponded to the line of first century Roman emperors. And that would point us towards the final Antichrist being non-Jewish, non-Christian, and a ruler from Gentile origin rather than being from the tribe of Dan.
All right. Put that on your list of things to look for when you're looking for the Antichrist. Jimmy Akin's our guest. This question comes from Tafazi. Read the channel description. Suppose the Pope called you and said, Mr. Akin, as a reward for all your good work, I'll let you ask me a question and I'll consult bishops, theologians, and other academics, and I'll issue the answer we find to the highest level of authority my conscience will allow me to. What do you ask?
Well, so one would be tempted to, I could be tempted to try to ask something that I don't know the answer to. But actually, I would be tempted to ask something that I do know the answer to. If this situation would happen, I would ask whether the Pope would infallibly define that as long as a person is willing to repent, that God is willing to be merciful and forgive that person's sins. I would ask this not because I don't know the answer to the question, but because it would be a service to many people who have scrupulous consciences and wonder if they may have committed the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit or an unforgivable sin. So it could be very helpful for those people to have an infallible definition saying as long as the person repents, God is willing to forgive them, which happens to be the truth. The Catechism even says that. It just doesn't say it infallibly. And I think that would also, so I'd ask it because it would be because it would be beneficial to people with scrupulous consciences. And it also would be in keeping with Pope Francis's emphasis on God's mercy. So I think he would seriously consider it.
That is so interesting. Tafazi, thank you very much. Tafazi assumes that the Pope would refer to you as Mr. Akin and not Jimmy, as so many people do. You are well known by Jimmy. Let's go to this. Gore764. I like that guy's name. What is the oldest ghost or haunt that we know of? Any really ancient or even prehistoric ghosts? Is it in theory possible for someone to encounter the ghost of, say, a Neanderthal or ancient Sumerian?
Okay, so there's a question about, are Neanderthals humans in the biblical sense? Do they have an afterlife? I would say they do. Whether or not they're humans in the biblical sense, I think they may well be. But I definitely think they had an afterlife because they had burial rituals. They would bury people with grave goods, and that's a sign that they believed in an afterlife. And if you believe in an afterlife, I think you got one. So it would in theory be possible to encounter their ghosts. And the same would be true of ancient Sumerians, who also were definitely human and definitely believed in an afterlife and even definitely believed in ghosts. But I think even though this is hypothetically possible, I think it's unlikely to happen due to the length of time that has passed. Ghosts don't hang around forever, and that's especially true on the theory that most ghosts are souls from purgatory. At some point, you get out of purgatory and you move on. So I think it's very unlikely that one would encounter a Neanderthal who was so bad that they're still being purged after all this time. Now, we don't have prehistoric records of ghosts because prehistory is the period before the invention of writing. And so we don't have any written records from before the invention of writing, and so we don't have prehistoric accounts of ghosts. I'm nevertheless very certain that people did encounter ghosts before the invention of writing, it happened about 3300 BC. So writing's basically about 5,000 years old. There are non-written archaeological remains like cave paintings, but they are ambiguous sometimes as to what you're looking at. Is this supposed to be a ghost, or is it supposed to be a deity, or is it supposed to be a nature spirit, or is it supposed to be a human in a costume? We're not really sure. So we can't use cave paintings to document belief in ghosts, at least as far as I'm aware. But as soon as writing got invented, we started getting ghost stories. And if you want to read about some of the earliest ones, there is a wonderful book by a British scholar named Irving Finkel. It is called The First Ghosts. And he has a bunch. He's a scholar in Mesopotamian literature, so Sumeria, Babylonia, and he tells a lot of ghost stories from back then. They had regular ghost encounters back in ancient Mesopotamia, and they had ways of dealing with ghosts. My favorite involves what happens when you got your dead grandpa hanging around and, kind of bugging people at the house. How do you deal with it? Well, he's not happy in the afterlife. So what you want to do is find a way to keep him happy in the afterlife so he doesn't keep showing up and, messing with things that are going on in the house today. So what you do is you get him married. And they have a ritual for a ghost marriage between your dead grandfather and a female ghost. And so you get him married, and then she will take him back to the afterlife and keep him happy there so he doesn't keep coming around and bugging you. And they even have an illustration of the woman. She's got granddad on a cord, a rope, and she's leading him back to the afterlife, and he's tied up in the rope and going along happily. So makes you wonder exactly what are they going to be doing in the afterlife, but she's going to keep him happy so he won't be bugging you.
How is this not a movie? Ghost marriage, where you got to get your grandpa married to a female ghost to get rid of him. This is a perfect movie plot. Thank you very much for that question. That came from Gore764, of course. And we will take a quick break. Be right back with more Jimmy Akin. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
One of the reasons we should go to Mass is because it is the food of the saints that we receive. And for the saints, they understood rightly that the time after Holy Communion, that those moments are the most precious moments of our lives.
The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, live from the EWTN Chapel, every morning, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Weird questions with Jimmy Akin today. Having a lot of fun going through the weird questions. And Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of a lot of books, including The Bible is a Catholic Book and A Daily Defense, 365 Days plus one to Becoming a Better Apologist, and also the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, with hundreds of mysteries available now for you to explore, and a new one each Friday. Gore764 asked us a great question before the break, and we've got another question from Gore764. So off we go. Would it be possible for apes today to evolve into humans in the future? If so, what would be the ramifications of this theologically?
Well, apes would not evolve into humans in the future. Humans have gone down their own evolutionary path, and once a population forks in evolution, neither fork can evolve into the other. So humans cannot evolve into being gorillas, for example, or chimpanzees, and in the same way, gorillas and chimpanzees cannot evolve into being humans. One of the reasons for this is that when a population forks, even though they had a common ancestor, each branch of the fork not only acquires new characteristics, they also lose characteristics on a genetic level that they used to have back when they were a united population. And that means that apes, whether you're talking chimpanzees or bonobos or gorillas, have lost some of the things that humans carried forward. And once something is lost, it is extraordinarily unlikely that it will be recreated. And so they've just lost things that you would need to be a human. And in the same way, humans have lost things that you would need in order to be a gorilla or a chimp or a bonobo. So neither can evolve into the other. That just doesn't happen in evolution. However, that doesn't mean that if God willed, apes couldn't evolve greater intelligence. If he wanted, then presumably they could evolve human-level intelligence. And if so, then they would have souls that are capable of supporting human-level intelligence. And, there could be various theological implications from that. But I think it's extraordinarily unlikely that this would happen. In the first place, characteristics evolve when there is selection pressure on a particular set of genes. Like in the case of humans, we've been getting smarter over the last few tens of thousands of years. And we even appear to have gotten smarter over the last few thousand and even the last few hundred years. It appears that there's been selection pressure on human genes to become both smarter and more cooperative, which is why we're able to build global civilizations, whereas our ancestors weren't. They were more rambunctious than we are, and they tended to have more conflict. They weren't as cooperative as we are. But it's been in our survival strategy to both get smarter because of interhuman competition and to be more cooperative, to blunt that competition. So in order for some group of apes, let's just say chimpanzees, because they're the closest, genetically speaking. If they were to evolve intelligence, they would need some kind of selection pressure that's different than what they experience right now. And so I don't know what that would be. I mean, God could come up with something, but I don't know what it would be. And the second reason I think this is very unlikely to happen is because of how slow evolution works. Although there can be jumps in fairly short periods of time, they're rare, and most of the time evolution proceeds on a really slow basis. And chimps are almost extinct. You've got this tiny population of chimps in a few places in Africa, and the same thing is true of bonobos and gorillas. These are not populous species, and so they're likely to go extinct themselves before evolution could smarten them up. Then there's the fact, how long is the world going to last? I mean, it could be a few more thousand years, but Jesus is coming back at some point here. And it's likely Jesus is going to come back before evolution could smarten up apes. So I don't think it's God's will to have apes evolve human level intelligence. But hypothetically, if they did, then they would have souls capable of supporting human level intelligence, and there would be ramifications from that.
Thank you, Gore, for that fascinating question. I'm actually kind of relieved because, I don't know, I just have this idea that apes and humans could not live together in peace if they developed human level intelligence. I just don't feel like it would go well.
I've seen a movie about that.
Yeah, a couple. Cruise Traveler. Oh, wait, did I do the break or did I forget the break?
The original.
I did the break.
The original Planet of the Apes, that was a G-rated movie, which just shows you how far ratings have progressed since 1968. Yeah, that was considered G-rated, and wow, when you look at some of the stuff in that movie, it would not be G-rated today.
No, and you couldn't say, "Keep your hands off me, you beep dirty ape," in a G-rated movie. Wasn't that in that movie? I think
Yep. That's from that movie. Yep. Charlton Heston delivers the line.
I don't know who the woman was that played the chimpanzee scientist lady, but
Kim something or other.
But she was able to make that character so charming, even with all that terrible makeup. I think she must be the greatest actress in the world.
And Roddy McDowall played her husband.
Yeah. By the way, in case you don't know, we're talking about Planet of the Apes. Cruise Traveler wants to know, do we take up the spiritual battle against evil even after we die when we become soul spirits?
So we certainly take it up in a new way by way of prayer in the afterlife, because once we're free of the distractions of this life and the limitations of this life, that'll enable us to focus on praying against evil in an even greater way. That's one of the reasons we ask the saints in heaven for their intercession. So I feel confident in saying that we do take up spiritual battle against evil in a new way after death by virtue of prayer. At least I think that highly likely. But we may take it up in other ways also. We may be able to take a more active hand in the battle against evil than just through prayer. But if so, God hadn't revealed that to us, so that remains pure speculation.
Thank you very much for the question, Cruise Traveler. It was Kim Hunter. So you were
Hunter.
You were right on that. Mm-hmm. This one comes from Axe Apologist 1991. What would Catholic ethics have to say about the vigilante efforts of someone like Batman, or one who has fewer rules like Punisher?
Okay, so whether vigilantism is justified depends on the situation. If local law enforcement is able to effectively deal with crime and violence and so forth, then you want to let local law enforcement handle it. On the other hand, if they're, assuming they can get there in time, as they say, when seconds count, law enforcement is only minutes away. So you be prepared to take defense into your own hands if need be.
Yeah.
But defending yourself is not the same thing as vigilantism. Vigilantism is where you go out actively patrolling and looking for problems to stamp down on them. Well, there are situations where local law enforcement is not able to effectively deal with crime and violence in a given area. There were, for example, after the American Civil War, this tends to happen after wars. After the American Civil War, there were various places that had been so stomped that there was a lot of violence and crime in the area. And so you had men banding together to form vigilante groups, some of which then got up to no good and turned bad, but others were just trying to defend people. And the same is true not just here in America, but in other places in the world. There are places, for example, in Africa, like in Somalia, that don't have functional governments and don't have functional law enforcement. And they need to have vigilantism as a way to try to keep the peace and protect people. So there are situations in which vigilantism is justified. And hypothetically, Gotham City, with its corrupt management, could be one of those places where the local police are not up to the task, despite the leadership of Commissioner Jim Gordon, because of all the corruption in town, they're not able to deal with it as well as they should, and therefore someone like Batman could be morally justified in helping out in an extra legal basis. However, one should use the least force necessary in order to effectively deal with problems like crime and violence and so forth. And thus it would be easier to justify the vigilantism of Batman, who has a no-killing ethic, than it would be to justify the vigilantism of the Punisher. The Punisher being a Marvel Comics character who actively uses death and torture and all kinds of things in his quest to deal with crime. So Batman is going to be more easily justified than someone like the Punisher.
Thank you for the question. What? I was trying to do Batman. Darren, what? I thought that was good. All right. Another question. This one comes from Spotted Stars 4521. I have two unrelated ones. One is simply, what exactly is an aura headache?
Okay, so if you're referring to the type of aura headache that I'm familiar with, you'd be referring to what's known as a migraine aura, which is a symptom that can but does not always have to precede the actual outbreak of a migraine headache. Migraine auras are caused by an electrical wave passing over part of the visual center in the brain. They often manifest looking like a curved blur on one side of your vision or the other, or a jagged curving line of light and dark, either on one side of your vision or the other. They often start close to the center of your vision, and then they expand and grow outward over a period of a few minutes as the electrical wave passes over that part of your visual center. And like I said, they may precede the outbreak of an actual migraine headache, but they don't have to. I actually have had migraine auras a few years ago because of a medication my doctor put me on. They started me at a low dose, and then they ratcheted me up to the next higher dose, and that's when I started having migraine auras. And I realized I'd never heard of them before, but I did research on the visual symptoms I was experiencing and found out, oh, I'm having migraine auras. And I realized the only thing that's changed recently is I went to this higher level of the drug. And so I immediately went off the drug, and the migraine auras stopped within like a week. And then I was off the drug for a long time. And then I eventually said, okay, we can experiment with me going back on it, but I'm going to stay at the lowest dose. And so we did that. And so I haven't subsequently had migraine auras. But in terms of what would an aura headache be, my suspicion is that Spotted Stars is thinking of a migraine aura. And I've never had a migraine headache. All I had was the aura.
Spotted Stars has two unrelated questions. The second one, let's say aliens exist and they also believe in a supreme being. How can we reconcile our differences if we know that Jesus is the true God incarnate and became incarnate as a human rather than an alien?
Well, it may be that God has simply chosen to deal with them differently than us, and he has no plans, or his plans for them just don't involve Jesus, and he's doing something else with them. It also could be that God may be planning on incarnating as one of them, and he just hadn't done it yet. So we might be in their pre-Christ, we might meet them in their pre-Christ period. Or it may be that he wants them to be saved through Jesus. Even though Jesus isn't one of them, he paid an infinite price, and an infinite price more than covers the sins, any number of sins. Therefore, God could redeem them through our Jesus, even though he's one of us.
Ah, all right. Thank you very much, Spotted Stars, for those two questions. Father John wants to know this. I always thought...
We're heading to the break.
Oh, we got a minute. Do you want to...
Okay, that's fine. We can at least read the question.
We'll get started. I always thought the Monita Secreta would be interesting to address. Love your work! ! You got an exclamation point from Father John.
Yeah. And Father John happens to be a Jesuit, so I'm not surprised he'd know about the Monita Secreta. Basically, it's a set of purported secret instructions to the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. And coming back from the other side of the break, I'll tell you about what it is, what it involves, and who wrote it.
Thank you, Father John, for that question. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin, and we're about to learn the inside secrets of the Jesuits. Hey, if you just want to learn not the inside secrets, but the meanings of the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ, he said a lot of things publicly, and but they still have many mysterious dimensions to them. Scott Hahn will be at our conference. Jimmy Akin will be at our conference. It's September 26th through 29th. Check it out. Get your tickets. Find out all about who the speakers are and what's going to happen there at CatholicAnswersConference.com. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Chek, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast to visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. About to learn the inside secrets of the Jesuits. Father John, who is himself a Jesuit, asked Jimmy this question. I always thought the Monita Secreta would be interesting to address. And you were about to address it, Jimmy.
Yeah. So the Monita Secreta is also known as the Secret Instructions of the Society of Jesus. It was allegedly written by Claudio Acquaviva, who was the 5th general of the Jesuit order. And the instructions direct that Jesuits are, for example, to use unethical tactics to raise money. And so they're supposed to, trick widows out of money and do various other things. They also are supposed to work to advance Jesuits to becoming bishops, and they're supposed to ruin the reputations of other Catholic orders like the Franciscans and the Dominicans and the Augustinians and so forth. It's like Jesuits rule, other Catholic orders drool.
Yeah.
They're supposed to promote that idea. However, the Moneta Secreta is an obvious forgery. It is manifestly contrary to actual Jesuit policy. For example, if Jesuits were secretly supposed to be trying to get their own promoted to become bishops, they wouldn't have an express policy discouraging Jesuits from becoming bishops. The fact that Pope Francis is a Jesuit is an exception. In order for him to be appointed bishop, there had to be special arrangements made. And because normally this is discouraged. Jesuits do not want to be bishops as a matter of policy, and that's directly contrary to what the Monita Secreta says. So if this is an obvious forgery, who did it? Well, we happen to know. His name was Jerome Zacharowski. He was a Polish man who had been a Jesuit, but he was expelled from the order in 1613 for disciplinary reasons. And him writing the Monita Secreta was apparently his way of getting back at the order that expelled him. It's like, you don't want me, I'm going to make you look bad in the public by faking this document.
That does not seem like a good plan. That seems like a terrible plan. Father John, thanks for the question. All right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to lie about Jesuits, at least lie in a believable way.
I know. And then we'll secretly do this, and then we'll secretly do that. All right. This next one, the person's name as given on their social media account is 1001011011010, which I believe you have translated to binary 4826.
Right. That's the binary equivalent of the number 4826.
All right. You have very interesting friends on the internet, Jimmy. Binary 4826 asks this: is the concept of a mentally dependent yet objectively real entity, as opposed to a hallucination or imagination, an actual logical possibility? Oh. For reference, I'm thinking of Jung's proposal in his essay on Hitler and Wotan. Some of Jung's views may not be compatible with Catholicism, but I'm wondering how much sense the proposal of a mentally dependent yet real entity makes.
Okay, so people will know who Hitler is. Most people may not know who Wotan was, though. Wotan was a Germanic deity who was basically the equivalent, like the Teutonic equivalent of the Norse Odin. And you can hear how Odin and Wotan sound the same. So it's the same god. It's just a different language group worshiping him. I haven't read that part of Jung. I've read some Jung, but I haven't read that part, so I can't comment on it directly. However, the idea of a mental entity that becomes objectively real is something that people have talked about, and it's known in some circles here in the West as a thought form. In the East, it's known as a tulpa. Thought forms or tulpas are logical possibilities in the sense that they don't involve a contradiction in terms. It's not like square circle or married bachelor. And so there doesn't appear to be a contradiction in the idea of a mental entity that takes on a mentally originating entity that takes on objective reality. And thus I would conclude that God could actualize thought forms if he chose, because he's omnipotent and can actualize anything that doesn't include a logical contradiction. There are also reports of tulpas existing in the real world. However, I haven't investigated these reports in detail, and they are broadly unconfirmed. I have yet to see convincing evidence for the actual existence of tulpas or thought forms, and we certainly have not one brought into the lab and poked at it. So I would put this in the interesting but unconfirmed basket as far as my present state of knowledge on them.
Thank you, Binary 4826. Appreciate the question. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin. And the next one comes from Alkaline Slime. Would it be moral to use a lightsaber in self-defense because it cauterizes all wounds, even if it results in a limb being severed?
Well, it would be morally legitimate to use a sword in self-defense if there is no better way available to defend innocent human life. And swords don't cauterize all wounds. They leave a big gaping wound when you slice someone with a sword. So if you've got a lightsaber that will cauterize the wounds that a sword would otherwise leave open, well, that would be preferable to using the sword, as it would pose less risk of bleeding to death for the person that you hit with it, the attacker who you're defending against. This would assume that all other things are being equal, because a lightsaber will also kill a person easier than a sword. And so if you're using a lightsaber to kill a person when it's not justified to kill the person, when it's not necessary to kill the person, then that would be bad. But in terms of, if we're in a situation where this is the best way to defend human life and this weapon will cauterize the wounds and that weapon won't, you'd want to use the one that will cauterize the wounds. Incidentally, even though people think of lightsabers as fictional, having been introduced in the 1977 movie Star Wars, they may one day be real. In his books, The Physics of the Impossible, physicist Michio Kaku lists lightsabers as a class 1 impossibility. And class 1 impossibilities are those that are impossible today, but that we may have the technology for in a century or two. So given how cool lightsabers are, we may well have them within a century or two.
Wow. So that class 1 is impossible now, but not utterly impossible.
Right.
Man, I didn't even know that book existed. I got to look and see about the transporter. I think the transporter.
Oh, he covers that too.
So how many classes? Like, is it like class
3?
10? Oh, 3.
He's got 3 classes of impossibilities. Class 1 are impossible today, but possible within a century or two.
Mm-hmm.
Class 2 impossibilities are impossible today, but possible within several centuries or several thousand years.
Mm-hmm.
And then class 3 impossibilities are those that actually break the laws of physics and should never be possible unless we're wrong about the laws of physics. And he's only got 2 class 3 impossibilities.
Really?
One of which he's wrong about.
Oh my gosh. Should I ask? I want to know so bad. Should I ask?
So the two are perpetual motion machines, which violate the laws of thermodynamics. In fact, there's a great scene in The Simpsons where Lisa builds a perpetual motion machine, and Homer is like, "Lisa, we obey the laws of thermodynamics in this house." Yeah. And he's right about that. Perpetual motion machines won't work. But what he's wrong about is precognition. We've actually got good evidence for precognition. Oh. And it doesn't break any laws of physics. In fact, there's a lot of discussion these days in physics of retrocausality, where the future can have an influence on the past.
Oh, very interesting. I would have thought
those are the only 2. Everything else, including transporters, is either class 2 or class 1.
That is, the transporter just seems like the most unlikely thing to me to work. But all right.
It is a class 2.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a break. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, "When we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue." Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year is 2019. EWTN launches Aussie Africa, a Nairobi, Kenya-based Catholic news agency, which will publish in English, French, and Portuguese for the African continent.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. It's always fun on Fridays when we get to have these a little bit out of the ordinary shows with Jimmy. Bible questions I love doing on a Friday, and I really love it when we do weird questions, and that's what we're doing this hour, weird questions with Jimmy Akin. So a whole segment more of weird questions to come. Apparently the Shire is much bigger than I thought. There's a lot of Elijahs in the Shire, because our next questioner is Elijah of the Shire 2699. Oh, that could be the year, I guess. I guess
it also could be Shire 2699.
Oh, that's true. All right. I didn't think that through before I started talking. Well, that's unusual for me to start talking without thinking it through. Elijah of the Shire wants to know this. What is the Catholic Church's stance on deja vu and or schizophrenia?
Well, the Catholic Church doesn't have a stand on either deja vu or schizophrenia. Deja vu is a real experience, though its causes are obscure, and there are a variety of proposed causes for it. One of the most likely, and probably different instances of deja vu, which is where you have a feeling that you've encountered something before, but you have no memory of encountering it before. They probably have different causes, but one of the most likely causes is a form of partial memory impairment, where you have a form of autobiographical amnesia regarding this specific thing. So you really have encountered it before or something like it before, you're just not remembering that. But still subconsciously you get this feeling of familiarity with it. And that's not necessarily pathological. It's, we all have things we know and learned at one point and experienced at one point that we don't remember. So just because you have deja vu, that doesn't indicate there's any pathology here. Schizophrenia, on the other hand, is considered pathological. It is considered to be a psychological condition that has a variety of symptoms that it manifests in, but there's debate in psychiatry about whether or not schizophrenia is really a useful classification, because the definitions for various psychological conditions have changed considerably over time, and these days we're living in an era where the standard manual for such conditions is known as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM. And the current DSM just has huge numbers of mental conditions with very subtle distinctions between them. And there is a movement to say, look, this has gotten out of hand. And rather than having this enormous number of conditions, we should really simplify all this and have, like 20 different actual mental conditions based on symptoms, and not worry about the precise combinations of symptoms. It'd be easier to say this person has this condition and this condition, rather than making up something that fits the exact cluster of symptoms they display. And that's particularly true of schizophrenia, because what it looks like is a grab bag of different conditions that would arguably better be treated separately. So there's that debate about schizophrenia, and the Catholic Church has no position on these matters, because they're matters of science, not of faith. So what is deja vu and what causes it? Is schizophrenia one thing, or should it be broken up and reclassified? Those are matters that the Church leaves to science to figure out.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, Elijah. I always do this joke whenever we get a deja vu question where I just read the question again. I'm not going to do it this time.
Thank you.
I've finally grown up. Trevor Kronk, 935, wants to know this. Can a bald man wear a normal-looking wig in church, or does that count as a hat?
The Catholic Church doesn't have a current regulation, at least in the Latin Rite, regarding men wearing head coverings. Now, it's a matter of custom for men to not wear head coverings, but if you're just an ordinary layman in the pews and you're not performing the liturgy itself, because there are rules for like when a priest or a bishop is supposed to have a head covering. But if you're, or at least a bishop, but if you're an ordinary man in the pews, then there are really no regulations. But it is a matter of custom for men not to wear hats in church. However, in the opinion of an ordinary person, a wig or a toupee is not the same thing as a hat. And thus, it would not appear to violate custom for a bald man to wear a wig or a toupee in church. That wouldn't violate the no hats for men in church custom, because wigs and toupees are not hats. And if it's a good wig or toupee, no one would even notice that he's wearing it. So I don't see a problem in principle here.
All right, Trevor. Thanks very much for that question. Misael asks this question. In John chapter 21, verses 18 and 19, Jesus tells St. Peter's past and future physical well-being. Could he be referring to St. Peter in a spiritual sense, as in his successors facing an imminent end? In other words, how the papacy will face its end?
In the literal sense of the text, Jesus is predicting Peter's martyrdom. He's not talking about anybody else like Peter's successors. Of course, it's possible that within the spiritual sense of the text, there could be a prophecy of how the papacy would end. How, the last pope might be a martyr, but this is very speculative. It is not, there's nothing in the text that really suggests that. And it's not clear that the papacy even will end, that there will be a last pope who dies as a martyr. In fact, given how short interregnums are, between the gap between popes, it's quite likely that there will be a living pope who's still reigning when Jesus returns, in which case the last pope would be alive at the second coming and would not have been martyred.
Ah, all right. Then he's got to turn the keys back in.
Yep.
I've been holding these for you. Here you go. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question, Misael. Appreciate that. Adrian W5055, what do you think of the idea that death, rather than being a punishment, was a sort of mechanism to give man a way out of becoming eternally evil like the demons?
Well, there is some traction in the history of Christian thought that regards death as a way to rescue man from an ongoing life of evil. This is speculative. Scripture doesn't say this, but it's one possible way of reading the introduction of death as a result of human sin. Although I should point out that normal living humans would still have free will in a way that the demons don't after their fall. So we wouldn't be irrevocably committed to evil if we didn't die the way demons have irrevocably committed themselves to evil after their fall. We don't become irrevocably committed in this life.
Okay. Thank you very much, Adrian, for that question. Nobile Cavalier. You may have done a Mysterious World episode about this. I haven't seen.
I think that's Nobile Cavaliere.
Oh, is that what I was supposed to say? Nobile Cavaliere?
I think so.
All right. Mm-hmm. All right, Nobile. I apologize, you may have done a Mysterious World episode about this. I haven't seen. But I've always wanted to know your opinion on the existence of fairies, elves, and similar beings.
So I did do episode 109 of Mysterious World on the Cottingley fairies, and you can get to that by going to mysterious.fm/109. I won't tell you my conclusions about them, but you can listen to the episode for yourself. Fairies, elves, and similar beings, have been reported and talked about down through Christian history, and I do plan to devote episodes to all of them. And they could be considered cryptoterrestrials, meaning a hidden race or hidden races here on Earth. They also could be considered interdimensionals, meaning they're from an adjacent dimension, but they can cross over to Earth. Oftentimes, cryptoterrestrials and interdimensionals are talked about in connection with UFOs, and I will be discussing UFO-related cryptoterrestrials and interdimensionals in the future, but I'll also be looking at fairies and elves and gnomes and things like that, considered based on historical accounts rather than in connection with UFOs. When it comes to my thought on them, I'm open. I don't have a problem if they exist, and I think it would be fascinating if they did exist, but I have yet to encounter what I would consider convincing evidence that they exist, although who knows what my future researchers will show.
Nobile, thank you very much for that. This one comes from Chris. I had a weird question about near-death experiences. In the paper, A Systematic Survey of NDEs in South India by Satwant Pasricha, some Hindus who experience NDEs see the god Yama. Some of these are veridical, in which, for example, a person is branded by Yama and then a mark appears in the same place that they were branded. How can we explain these reports in terms of Catholic theology? And do these reports show that NDEs are hallucinations, since these people saw what culturally they believed? Thank you, Jimmy.
Well, so let's deal with the last question first. People interpret all of their experiences in terms of their culture and background, and that doesn't mean it's a hallucination. It just means this is how I interpreted what I saw. So I wouldn't say that because aspects of NDEs shift depending on the culture someone is from, they're reporting the same thing. Or they tend, certainly the core of the experience is the same set of phenomena. They may apply different names or labels to parts of the phenomena, but they're reporting the same basic phenomena. So that doesn't argue hallucination to my mind, especially not when there are vertical elements, like people come back knowing something they had no natural way of knowing, and it turns out to be true. In this case, well, yeah, in India, death is personified as Yama, and that's not in principle, and Yama is called a deity, but in India, but the Bible sometimes speaks of the angel of death, and we're told that the gods of the nations are angels or fallen angels. So if you got an angel of death, someone who comes from a polytheistic culture could regard that angel as a deity. In fact, in the book of Revelation, twice John falls down to worship an angel, and the angel tells him, get up. So if you see a glorious angel that represents death, you could say, oh, that's Yama. It's also possible that Hindu NDEers are just perceiving death in a personified way based on their own culture, when it comes with no actual angel involved. When it comes to the brand marks that you mentioned, I haven't read the paper, although I look forward to doing so, but assuming it's true, they could be caused psychokinetically, which is mind over matter. So if you're having an NDE and you get branded by a representation of death and a mark appears on you, that would be psychokinesis in some form. What it wouldn't answer is whose psychokinesis it was. It could be my own. If I believe that I'm being branded by death, that can cause a mark on me. The same way that there are people who, if you hypnotize them and tell them I'm touching your skin with a red hot poker and you just touch them lightly with an ink pen, their skin will blister, just through the psychological force of the experience. Same thing could happen if I believe the god of death is branding me. It also could be a mark that is caused by the angel, if there's an angel involved in the experience, or it could be a mark caused by the actual real one true God, if he wills it to happen in this experience. So I think there are aspects of these experiences that people will describe differently based on their cultures, but that's just a matter of how we perceive and interpret things, not a matter of what's ultimately real, because they're all reporting the same fundamental stuff.
Chris, thank you for that interesting question. It's so that thing that you say, Jimmy, about that we experience everything through our culture and experiences. That's been helpful to me in the way we talk about apparitions and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. People are going to have it's not like we're not, our interior life is not involved in these things. It certainly is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jimmy, I sure enjoyed those 2 hours. They went very quickly for me. Thanks very much for doing them with us.
Yeah, no problem.
Today, Friday, each Friday, you can get a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Go to mysterious.fm or just check out Jimmy's materials on YouTube. And that'll do it for us. What a fun Friday. If you've got a weird question that you want to submit, you can send it to us at radio@catholic.com or check out Jimmy's various social media places and send it to Jimmy. One way or another, we'll do our best to get it on the air and get you an answer. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.